a Heart for East Asia podcast from OMF US.
Well, brothers and sisters, we want to welcome everybody back to the podcast and the special edition where we get to sit with the one and only Travis Pappa. I'm excited to be able to introduce you to Travis and the incredible ministries that he's been a part of as God's led him in his life and mobilization efforts that he's been undertaking for the OMF US team as a member of our team here in the States, but actually located over in Cambodia, doing a unique thing through social media, YouTube, and podcasts. And we're going to get all into that. We're also going to get into God and how he's been working his life since a child. But I just want to start off by saying, welcome, Travis.
Hey, thanks so much. And for those of you listening, Rodney is the man. Great role model. And keep listening to this. I love the stories that you're coming up with. Find them.
Well, thanks, brother. And thanks for being willing to come on the show and just share your story and how God's been working in your life. And on that note, before we get into where you are today, we always like to go back and find the origin story. And so we want to go back to little Travis's life growing up and what was happening. Where did you grow up? What was God doing in your life? And who are the people that God brought into your life to the point where you saw the truth and gave your life over to Jesus?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for that. I think we have to start at my parents because my parents weren't originally Christian. But when they started seeing a whole bunch of people getting divorced, like a few years into marriage, they were like, we don't want that. And especially when I was on the way is when they really started realizing, hey, we want something different for our family. So I think it really starts there with their decision and their commitment to Christ. And it was easier for my mom, harder for my dad. But I'm so thankful that they yielded to the Lord because that allowed me to grow up in a Christian home at church and stuff. But I think even when you grow up in church, you still have to make a decision for yourself, right? And so I mean, are you from a Christian background?
Well, mine's a little bit wonky. My she is still to this day an incredible prayer warrior and always been faithful. My dad's side of the family was Catholic and he was kind of in and out and not so much on his side. My greatest influence was from my mom and her incredible faith. I also grew up in the Bible Belt too. So I was surrounded with Christians, but you didn't grow up in the Bible Belt. You grew up in
California, right? The very anti-Bible, right? So that's why I think it was like a huge blessing because basically my parents went from non-Christian to Christian in a very liberal state and where things got crazier and crazier. So I was in Silicon Valley and I mean, it was a great place to grow up in. It is not such a great place now, I would say, just for the reason of, I mean, I remember even when, after I had graduated college, thinking like, I do not want to raise kids in this like super materialistic like space because it just gets like everyone I remember was just into like going out and even Christians, it was just like, let's go out to eat this food or this food. And it's like, I don't know, at some point when the Lord is stirring, I don't know, a calling on your life, that stuff just seems, for me, it's just so minute. So anyway, so growing up, I had to make a decision myself. I was always really attracted to like, I don't know, maybe testing things. My parents can attest to that. I was pretty strong-willed. And thank goodness they prayed, Lord, don't break his will, but bend it in the right direction. So I think that's a great prayer. And I think the Lord really answered that. So I loved and was attracted to Proverbs. And so that was kind of a huge part of my testimony is like, I would like test that. And I was like, is this true? Is this true? And time again, it was. I was baptized. I mean, I was thinking about that deep stuff pretty early on. I won't get into too many details, but I also had some medical things come up that I was in a couple hospital beds. And like, and when that happens to you at like 11, 12, 13, you really do contemplate life and like you're able to kind of comprehend death. And I think that was really good for me because it made me realize how blessed life is, like what a blessing life is. And I remember one time in particular, I was sitting in a hospital bed, kind of feeling sorry for myself until I found the kid next to me, the curtain, finally I could see who was next to me. And it was another kid like my age and he had like a collapsed lung and his parents were trying to like afford the medication for him. And I was just like, well, that's humbling. That's good to know. It's like, I'm not the only one in these situations. And am I going to basically be a victim and just like Or am I going to just say, you know what? I'm happy to be alive for what I've been, and how do I use what I have left? I think that did make me more thinking about like deeper things. And I was baptized around 13. Definitely before that, I was sold on the fact that like Jesus Christ is Lord and God is who he says he is. And then I actually was really funny. It's so fun to kind of reflect on this because I forget they were doing ministry in Kenya. I remember actually quite a few of my friends went on that mission trip. And I remember thinking, I really want to go. But because of my medical things, I couldn't be far away from a hospital. So basically I had this thing in my heart where if part of it erupts, basically I have like 2 hours to get open heart surgery. Otherwise you're gone. And a lot of people don't know they have it. So they're like, I have this chest pain. What is this? And then they're gone. And so thankfully, at least I knew I had it. But, it was, I couldn't go on any mission trips, even though I kind of felt something there.
Was it your parents go on that trip or just your church community?
Just other people from church and my other friends and their parents were going. I remember one of my friends was like complaining about like eating beans and rice. I just remember, you got to go on a mission trip. That sounds so cool. Like, I don't care. Like, beans and rice sound great. I just remember thinking that, but maybe that was the Lord prepping my heart, delayed gratification or something like that. Or just that nudging of like, there's something there. So it was kind of cool because as I got older, I did also have a choice too. My dad would always take me on these backpacking trips. That's great. Like, you get to really rough it with like hardly anything in the woods with all the other guys. And that was great, like great bonding with my dad, my brother, and other men from our church. And then also like it prepares you to like, how to rough it. You're fine with it. And makes you appreciate everything you have in the city when you come back, right? On one of those trips, I remember specifically saying like, hey, my dad sitting down with me is like, how do you feel about the risk? It'll be your choice, because if something were to happen, with your heart out there in the forest, we'd be away from it. And it seems relatively like, probably not going to happen without indicators, but, what are you feeling like? And I feel like that was like a moment for me as a teenager. It's like, oh, do I want to let this medical thing control my life, or do I want to like control my life? So I think what's cool is when I choosing to go on that trip and stuff like that, just kind of kept reminding me that, it's in the Lord's hands. And I think to this day, that is like so true, especially when you're living abroad. Like, oh my gosh, there's so many things that can kill you and anywhere really, but especially Cambodia. My goodness, the traffic, right? It's like hair-raising experience every time you're going. Did you drive around in Thailand? Was it kind of similar?
Yeah, I mean, but plus I've been all over East and Southeast Asia. My actual first trip overseas was Cambodia.
Oh, really?
So yeah, that's where I got the mission bug to go to work with underage peoples in these areas.
That's so cool. Yeah. There's definitely something that stirs up within us, right? And so I think as I felt that stirring, I got a book called Revolution in World Missions by KP Yohanan. He does Gospel for Asia. And that's when I heard about like indigenous missionaries, like our
How
national
old were you
missionaries.
at the time?
That was in college. So I was still desiring to go. And then in college, I kept having it. So I actually went on a short-term mission in college and just loved it. And there were just so many signs and things along that way that was just like, feel like
Where was your first short-term trip?
That was in Guatemala.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, loved it. And really amazing team. And then what's really cool, God brought all sorts of people in my life, especially, my parents, my grandparents, they would do missions in their retirement. So it's so inspiring. And so I actually ended up getting to go. My second trip was on a short-term trip with them to Nicaragua. And I loved it.
That's so cool.
Yeah, it's so cool. I got to be with them.
Wow.
Yeah. So, that is like just a priceless memory, because I just think that, so many people have these dreams for retirement, but like my grandparents, they're serving all around the world and so involved in church and constantly having people over and staying at their house. It's just such a vibrant life. And I think that's how like the life of a believer like is when you trust him. So I think a combination of those books and several other missionary books, taking the Perspectives course, just still feeling called. I wanted to go to long-term missions a long time ago, but a lot of people were like, hey, just test it out with some short-term trips, see if you really like it. It's good. I'm very thankful for that. But sometimes I feel like we play it safe, right? And, when God's calling, it was great, a blessing, but I just kept remembering that stirring each of those short-term mission trips. There was something, I would just have these really cool moments with God, just being alone with him. And like, I feel like I was made for this.
When you went off to college, did you go to college to prepare for missions, or were you preparing for something else?
No, so I went to a secular school. I went to State University that I thought if I go to the Christian club on campus, these are the people that actually want to be Christ followers. But if I go to a Christian school, I'd kind of had a few experiences with some Christian schools and Christian camps where I was like, that what kind of bothered me the most is people who would like say they're Christian or like kind of Christian, and we're all on our different journeys. And so I don't want to criticize that, but I would just say for me, that's something that really weakened my faith, to be around a whole bunch of people that like kind of wanted to seek Jesus. But if I was with people that really wanted to seek Jesus, that's what built my faith. And that's what I like, that not built my faith, but I think that's what strengthens my faith. And I think that's what, like, I don't know, you feel such a great fellowship with people like that. And it's a sharpening iron type of situation that I knew I wanted, especially during college years. So it was great. Like my faith got tested. And I mean, by tested, it's just you're very confronted with like, do you want the pleasures of the world, or are you going to seek Jesus? And you can't be on the fence. Like it's either one or nothing. It's like one or the other. You cannot be, because Jesus, I don't think is worth part way. Obviously not worth part way, but it's like this is not going to work for anything. So I think that was kind of something that solidified missions for me. So I ended up studying physics to be a physics teacher because I just thought that would be a great, ministry stateside or abroad if I ever have to work. And yeah, loved that. And great ministry with kids, doing Young Life and stuff like that. But even then, there was something that kept stirring in me, even though I do short-term trips in the summers. Was awesome. But again, I kept getting that stirring. And at one point I remember thinking, like, why am I waiting? Am I expecting someone to just like come into my classroom and just be like, hey, here are some tickets to Southeast Asia? Because I kept feeling confirmation in that zone too, which was wild. And so I think that I was praying and I'd have long talks with God about it's like, how are we going to make this work? And then I guess there were two things. One was like a question. It was like, okay, if I have like multiple different lives to live, like how could I spend these different lives? One, I could just, be a career teacher. I could do, some sort of profession, with my physics degree, go into industry, make a ton of money. I was in the Bay Area. Some of my friends were like, hey, you should come work for Google and all this type of stuff. And you could use all that and make a lot more than you can in teaching. You could do missions later, save up for it first. And then I was like, well, I could do full-time mission work. As I was looking through those lives, I was like, well, I only get one life. So
one of those doesn't pay well.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that was the coolest thing, because it's been so awesome how God's like confirmed it, like so many different confirmations how God is. But when I actually decided they were asking me to renew my term as a teacher, and I was keeping it on the desk for so long, that pink slip or whatever. I finally like signed it. I won't be returning. And I told God I'll book a one-way ticket to Cambodia. If I get a job, then okay, it's an open door. I'll have.
Wait a minute.
Yeah.
This is after college. You went into teaching.
I went into teaching, taught for 3 years.
3 years, and at the end of 3 years, there's a option to continue.
Yeah. In fact, every year they ask you if you want to renew. But that third year, I just was having those conversations that I described with the Lord. I just felt like, what am I waiting for? God's provided. And I'd been applying for jobs in that zone, Thailand, Cambodia, some other countries around there, hoping for a job of some sort, to try to do the responsible thing and at least have a job, right? And I hadn't heard anything back. And I needed to sign this paper, am I going to renew or not? And so I decided, you know what? I'm not going to renew. I'm going to take that leap of faith. And Lord, if I'll give myself 3 months. And if I have a job in 3 months, okay, it's an open door. And if not, I'll head back to America. Maybe I must have misheard, something like that.
So you're saying it's an open door to Cambodia? Why Cambodia?
What's interesting is that I had applied several times. I wanted to do a short-term trip in Cambodia. I don't know what seemed to nudge me that way. But then it was like closed with OMF. Like they weren't taking any more people. They weren't doing short-term stuff, and several other things like just kind of fell through for that. So it was always redirected. But again, you take like that calling you can't get away from, right? There's something there. And when I chatted with OMF, because I loved, at some point after testing out different mission organizations, I really loved OMF because I felt like they were actually moving in those values of the indigenous church planting movements. Other organizations are doing great things too. But I think that for me, especially with the organizations that I had kind of test drove on short terms, I remember sometimes seeing like a mission group that said it believed in indigenous church planting movements, but then there was like no one on the leadership from the local population. And I think that is hard to have an indigenous church planting movement without the indigenous. And sure, early days, it can look like that, but I think pretty quickly you want to be getting advice from locals and getting direction and empowering leadership type of thing. And again, different strategies, different ways, no problem. But I just felt clear in what God had called me to. And I felt like OMF said that. And then the missionaries that I met were totally doing that. And they were very humble. I thought, wow, there's a lot I can learn from them. And so I think that's what kind of sold me with OMF. But the problem is that I signed this no going, I gave up my job for the next year. And OMF was like, yeah, it'll probably take like at least a year to fundraise, for full time, and probably have to go back to college and all this stuff. I was like, well, I just feel God calling me now. And I feel like I have to be faithful to that calling, but I love OMF. I want to work with you. So I signed on.
And you're told that Cambodia isn't taking short-term trips now.
They weren't back then. And so that wasn't an option, which was maybe perfect because the Lord was kind of forcing me into a jump of faith, right?
So what do you do?
So that's what I did. I was like, Lord, okay, one-way ticket. So got one-way tickets to Cambodia. It was just very much in faith. And I knew that like, okay, my job's ending in a few months. And, I have some savings for a plane ticket in a few months in Cambodia. And I was trying to figure out like, what is missionary life in Cambodia? What is this? I was Googling, I was YouTubing it. And I didn't find much at all, especially in terms of the mission. So a lot of tourism stuff, but, nothing in terms of like missionaries. So I was like, oh man, okay, let's see. And wouldn't you know it, but about a month or two later, after I had kind of signed that paperwork, crazy, I hadn't heard anything back, but a month or two later, I get 2 job offers both in Cambodia for teaching positions, science teaching positions in schools. So that was pretty cool. And I don't know what to make of that. I was like looking up, are these scams? Are they like, I don't know what, like, how do you figure that out in Cambodia? So anyway, I ended up interviewing for both, ended up taking the one in Phnom Penh, and was really amazing because like God had set that up before I even left. And not only that, but that job, as part of the compensation package, they pay for your ticket. It was pretty cool. So I got reimbursed for that. So the Lord totally covered me. And it was just really amazing because he totally covered finances for that. That it was a 2-year term. Oh man, so blessed.
So you signed a 2-year term to go teach in Cambodia. You're not with a mission agency at this time. You've kind of experienced or kind of went down that route to explore that, but it didn't work out. You're going over there single, young. I'm sure you're talking with your family, friends, church community about this. I hope so. What are they saying? They're saying you've lost your mind? What's going on there?
Right. Yeah, I think that at that point, because I had talked about missions so much and done all the short-term trips, and they had, gave me the advice, go on short-term trips, see if you're really called. And that was like confirmed. I think at that point, they kind of realized like, okay, like he seems pretty serious about this. Did have some tough conversations because it's tough. Leaving family is like the hardest thing, right? That's something that to this day, I miss them. It's so great being back in for this short moment in the US to get to visit them, but that's hard. And I think that it's hard to leave friendships, but thankfully, we can keep in contact in a big way, but certain things do change. And yeah, really solid friends I think you stay in contact with and you find ways. But, you also don't have as much time for relationships when you're building relationships in Cambodia, and you need to be present. You don't need to, don't be on your phone the whole time. That was actually one thing I love doing photography. And I just told myself, like, no pictures or videos like the first year. So I took very few from that first year. I didn't want to be that American, with his phone out all the time. Wouldn't you know it, after that first year, everyone starts getting phones in Cambodia. So I was like, okay, cool. But the cool thing is that when I went over, I was volunteering with OMF. I was a friend of OMF. I signed on with OMF. I made contact with them right away because I knew I needed mentors. I know I needed accountability. I wanted that. Okay. And so I really, really would say, like, you must do that. And for anyone who's not going with an organization, like, just have really tight structures, because I see so much missionary burnout or so many like wayfaring. And I think that being a part of OMF early on was great, because I got to meet really inspiring missionaries. I got to talk with them throughout those 2 years and work alongside of them and just get more and more excited for missions. 2.5 years in, I actually ended up stepping out of that current job or that job because it was a tool to get to the mission field. But at some point it became it kind of became a barrier, because I was starting to get really connected with people, and people, Cambodian pastors were inviting me out to the provinces for projects, and Cambodian friends were saying, hey, could you help us with this project out here? And so on the weekends I would be out in the provinces, and then it was just so conflicting with my schedule, because being a full-time teacher takes a lot. Mm-hmm. And so I ended up putting in my notice for that. I followed through on the 2 years, and then they actually said, like, please stay longer. So I stayed another 6 months. What's really funny is that 6 months, like, I ended in, I think it was December 2019. So that's when I stepped out of teaching, right before the COVID craziness. God spared me from all of that. And then what was wild too is that was the year that I did a Serve Asia trip in Cambodia. So it was like a whole year just with on that. And that was amazing. And I highly recommend people do Serve Asia if you're interested.
Serve Asia is our short-term ministry program. It's usually 2 weeks up to a year. So you're actually on the field, got approved on the field to do a short-term ministry on the field you're already on.
Yeah. So it was really weird, because when I came back 2.5 years later, I got my debriefing packet in the mail. It was waiting there in the US for me. But I knew people from OMF, they knew me. So it was kind of an easy transition. But you can see how I don't know, it's it was tough to navigate, but I'm so thankful for everyone with OMF being flexible with that. Well, they followed all the rules, but they just found ways of making it work.
Yeah, we try to be pretty flexible. I think you missed one thing, though, that you started while you were, I think in 2018, you were teaching. You weren't with Serve Asia at that point, but you were a friend of OMF.
Yeah.
You started a YouTube channel, right?
Yeah. So basically after that year had passed, that first year where I was no touching the phone type of thing, vlogging was such a thing back then. My students were crazy into it. And I was like, this is insane. They were all into the American vloggers, which was really funny at an international school. They all watched YouTube and stuff like that. Maybe this was, what would you say, short-sighted of me or arrogant of me, but I was I watched some of the vloggers they were into, and it was like Logan Paul. I was like, what the heck? This guy doesn't have any substance to him. And he's just pointing the camera, and it's our lives here in Cambodia are way more
show you different world.
Yeah. And I don't know. I just thought man, this is what the kids like. I mean, I guess it's cool, but I just think that there's so much more opportunity for more depth. But it's cool. It's a cool medium, and I think that they did a great job of I guess capturing the moment and doing wild things, which is what my siblings and I would do when my dad had a camcorder. We would record things and make little videos, just for fun and laugh. And that's basically what YouTube is, right? It's just a lot of people posting that type of stuff. So basically I said, hey, nobody was filming what missionary life looked like. Even in 1 year, I saw missionary burnout. So in my just after 2 years or 3 years, I just saw people dropping off of the mission field, and that scared me too. And I realized, are we attracting the wrong people? And it wasn't just OMF. There's lots of other organizations and people that would come with this like great idea of a project. It sounded really great. They had a lot of funding and all this type of stuff. And it's like that cafe closed, and it's like, what happened to the donor money? What happened to it's just gone. It was crazy. I just thought, I think it would be cool if we could show people what is life like in Cambodia as a missionary. And maybe it'll help us attract the right people. And maybe if they get little pictures of what being in the village in Cambodia looked like, maybe that would help attract the right people and get people excited about going out and serving.
Yeah. So that's when you started the YouTube channel, Guy in Cambodia.
Right. Because everyone was naming. So it's interesting. The story behind that, everyone was naming their YouTube channel after their name, right? But I was like, I don't really want it to be the name. Like, I don't, you know what I mean? So I tried to pick something really random, but also memorable. So I picked that, and actually, I don't think I ever shared this on my channel. I've shared it with a few people, but kind of the dream is that, I'm not always that guy in Cambodia, that I hand it off to someone else who becomes that guy in Cambodia. So I want it to have that same flavor, and especially the younger generation that are way better at taking videos and doing creative stuff than me. That would be a fun thing to kind of hand off to someone else.
That's cool. I love that. That's thinking ahead. But you will not always be the guy behind the camera or the podcast of that guy in Cambodia. Somebody else can like that.
I have a few people in mind, so that's kind of fun. And if anyone listening to this wants to, then get out to Cambodia.
There you go. So cool. So you started that after your first year teaching. You did your second year. Then you did the short-term trip with Serve Asia. So take us from there. You finished that up. What's next? What's happening in your life? How are things moving?
Yeah. After that, so I had funding for that year, but then after that, there wasn't necessarily funding, and so I had to kind of get creative with okay, do I head back to the States and work and fundraise, or do I continue on the mission field? Oh, and by the way, 2020, a lot of people left the mission field with COVID, going back home and whatnot, and lots of crazy stuff. And they came to me too to ask, do you want to book tickets to go back home? And I just remember thinking, well, I totally devoted this year to serving the Lord in Cambodia. Until God really removes us, I'm not going to choose out of it, or I'm going to do my best not to try and choose out of it. And I remember chatting with another missionary there. They were we were both she was asking us did I do the right thing? And I was like, well, it's up to the Lord. If he really wants us out of here, he'll find a way. What was so cool and was so crazy is that Cambodia was one of the least restricted countries. And so we still kept doing a ton of ministry all throughout 2020. It wasn't until later on in 2021 where they had some pretty crazy lockdowns, or they tried to do lockdowns, but you can't lock down a developing country. People need to get to the market. People need stuff. Economy needs to flow, so you can't really do that. Anyway, so it's funny, God totally protected us in there. So anyway, 2020 comes, or 2021 comes. That's when I kind of started doing some more entrepreneurial things to try and do side gigs to, fund missions. And so that's kind of when I went to a part-time thing. I think the goal is still the story is not finished yet, and I'm trying to get back to full time. That's what I was chatting with you before this, right? Trying to get back to full time. So that's the mission. And I don't know if God's developing that entrepreneurial side for a reason, for a purpose. And I'm just trying to be faithful, because there's been some great confirmations of there's big parts of my personality that really resonates with other entrepreneurs. But I think that it's just, you have to be so crystal clear about the calling that sometimes it can take over your time and your energy, then it can take away from the mission. So one of my mentors just said, yeah, some people are really good. He's business as missions. He was he had a great German accent too. And he is so wise, but he was I see a lot of businessmen that aren't so great at being missionaries, and a lot of missionaries that aren't so great at being businessmen. And so it's it's hard to have both. And I agree. And so we'll see how the Lord does that. I guess the positive sides, though, one of the reasons why we kind of got led into the entrepreneurial thing is because part of that 2020, I was working with urban poor. And we were doing so much research. There's a great book, if anyone is working with urban poor wherever in the world, this book is super relevant. It's called Bridges Out of Poverty. You can get it used on Amazon. It is awesome. But they talk about how you help people out of poverty and like really practical stuff and research back stuff. That's like stuff you never hear in the news. Like if you really want to help people out of poverty, you do have to provide some level of education and work. But the problem is people don't want education until they can see the benefit of it. And so work and jobs is one of like the best ways to actually help people out of poverty. That's kind of another piece that like bumped us to the entrepreneurial side is, hey, like creating jobs can actually, you have a lot of opportunity to impact people as employees. Because I mean, we gave out so much, good free advice and education and other things, but it's different if you, and people wouldn't follow it, even if when it was coming from Cambodians that understood it. Yeah. But people would just keep doing things that drop them deeper and deeper in debt and kept taking out more and more debt in really unhealthy ways like consumer debt. But if you offer people a job where they have to work or like, oh, you're required to do some of this education or, hey, whatever you save, you get bonus, that type of stuff. Yeah. You can really incentivize great behaviors through work.
That's really neat, man. You, at some point in your time in Cambodia, you met somebody who you ended up marrying. How'd that story come about?
It's kind of funny. I guess that's another like godsend, right? Big time, because she was actually at that school in Phnom Penh, and she worked as the manager of the Khmer teaching assistants. And so what's interesting as a younger single guy, right? There were people that, there was some mutual interest, but honestly, when I was, with the Lord, it's like, no, they're just like, no. And especially if you're just honest with yourself, I think that you can, I don't know, you can see people's hearts. And I think that as much as physical attraction plays a role, there's something to say about the spiritual and emotional attraction that things have to click. So it was really funny because so I think that was really good. Yeah, I think it was kind of easy at that point too, because like when you take the bigger steps of faith you take, I feel like it's easier. If you take a step of faith to to go over to Cambodia type of thing, you're like, I do not want to mess with stuff that's going to mess that up, type of thing. So it's like, I do not want to get in the wrong relationship with someone who, doesn't have the same values and goals in mind. So it's pretty easy to kind of, I think, sift through some of that potential distraction, whether it be through women or even like some missionaries, like watch a lot of Netflix. And it's like, that's totally not me. I don't want that in my life. And if I am binge watching YouTube or something like that, it probably means that maybe I'm not acting on something that God's calling me to, and that's my way of escaping. Or maybe it means sometimes you need to veg out for sure. Yeah, I get that and process things. But I mean, I've just found that it's like when you're really walking with the Lord and just things are just falling into place in wild ways that you can't explain. It's like you don't want to get away from that.
So you thought you were going to be single?
Well, no, I think I was open to it, but I definitely I didn't want to jump into anything. It was pretty crazy because her office, her name's Lekana, her office was in a supply area. So where all of us teachers had to get supplies and stuff. And so she had needed help with some chemistry stuff because she was studying for an extra agriculture degree. Of course, I was the science teacher. And then, of course, I needed some help with Khmer culture and language. And I actually had lots of people that I was going to for that. She was just one of them. There were a couple times where we just started talking and it was pretty crazy. There was like so much we had in common that we were both pretty weirded out because it was like, how did we grow up on separate sides of the planet, yet we're so similar in like our values? And definitely the way she treated people was like one of the biggest things that I thought was just like very much of the Lord. Like she noticed people that other people didn't notice, like staff or janitors or things like that. She really cared for people. Yeah, there was just a great connection that I remember thinking, especially as I was praying, where it was just like, this is someone who actually loves the Khmer people. They're not just looking for a green card. They're not just looking to get out of their country. Lekana loves the Khmer people and wants to serve and is serving very actively. So anyway, it was cool. So that connection happened. We didn't end up getting married until 2022. So yeah, almost 3 years now.
And you have a growing family.
Yeah, yeah, and a little offspring that is probably half of Lekina's height already. That's been really fun too, and it's really, really cool too, especially when you have that connection with someone because you see parts of both of you in your kid. And it's really, really special for both of us. And oh yeah, it's just been so cool. There's been so many moments. And it was such a godsend too, because we really weren't expecting to have a kid that quick. And that was kind of cool.
That's awesome, man. Love being a father. And
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I thank you so much again for that advice too about the rhythms and stuff, because you really have to get that stuff down. Otherwise, like your life can get really out of control quickly.
yeah, that's what I was talking about. Recently we were together and we were talking about just some helpful, thoughts about raising a family and being a good husband and all those kinds of things. I said, for me and our family, it's been about finding healthy rhythms in our lives. And every season, as time goes by, means new rhythms need to come into play because life comes with changes and new things to interact with. But if you can find healthy rhythms and gravitate towards those and cherish them for the moment that you have, it's a very special thing we found as a family. So
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think even hearing some of your stories about how you're intentional with your kids and, your family and what you guys choose into and don't. Yeah, I think that's so good because I think if you go by default, you just kind of go with the crowd and then you just end up with the same problems as the crowd.
Yeah, you got to be intentional about it. And like I said, as time changes, things change, and you got to change those to adapt to the different situations that your kids, especially, are going through when they're young and adolescence and that puberty age and all that. It's crazy.
Yeah, exactly. I'll keep coming back to you for each of those benchmarks. I'm like, okay, to give me advice for
See some new rhythms.
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah.
Now, your family, your growing family, you are now fully with OMF, and you're a mobilizer for the U.S. home site based in Cambodia. How does that work?
I thanks again for the much flexibility that many people have helped us do that with. And I think that for us, how it works now is because Lekin's family's in Cambodia and my family's in the US, obviously we're tied to both in a way. I think there's a lot of ministry opportunities in both, but we definitely have a heart for Cambodia and seeing the unreached peoples of Cambodia be reached. I mean, there's so much opportunity. I mean, just in a nutshell, because of the Khmer Rouge, most of the population is a younger generation. They're looking for identity, national identity. They're looking for what is stronger than the thing that maybe led them into some of that stuff. And then they're also really, there's such an openness. Like there's a great spiritual awareness that is in Cambodia because they see and understand and encounter spiritual things often and see it as that, as what it is. And so they're much more open to spiritual conversations. It's not about like, is there a God so much as like, okay, which God type of thing. And so I think that's really cool. Huge openness there. Like 90% plus of Cambodia speaks one language, Khmer. So that's like one kind of unreached people group. And then there's mission efforts happening. There's a lot of Khmer believers, but there's a lot of pockets of Cambodia that don't have any Christians living in them. And so there's so much opportunity to kind of go before we get major opposition, before things close down to stuff. There's definitely some signs that it might not always be like this. And so this is great opportunity. So if the next generation could be reached for Christ, I mean, it just sets a totally different trajectory for that whole country and obviously for every individual who serves Christ. But yeah, so we definitely still have a heart for that. And so I think that being a part of mobilization and advocacy based in Cambodia allows us to do all the social media stuff. It allows us to be pretty in touch with like on the field stuff so that, hey, you want to know, like I work tag team with Nathan Martin, who, worked in Cambodia for some time. Yep. He's one of my mentors and someone that I can go to for questions. And he did our premarital counseling. And so great family. And so we can tag team it. So people who are interested, he can send them to me. I can tell them more and then I can send them to him for equipping. Mm-hmm. It just kind of has allowed us to speak pretty directly, answering questions that people have, kind of like me, before. I wish I could have met someone that could tell me more about missions, who had actually like been on missions. Like when I was seeking, what is it like to be a missionary? It was harder for me to reach and find people that had actually been doing mission work or were currently doing mission work.
Yeah, so that's really cool because the way your current ministry is structured right now, it's very unique, like you were saying, because if I need somebody interested in Cambodia, I can be like, hey, let me introduce you to Travis. He's actually living and doing ministry in Cambodia. And one of his main goals is to mobilize the next generation and go and reach these unreached peoples. So that's one aspect of it, which is really cool because like you're saying, I can actually talk to somebody on the field, get their experience, learn from them right now and see that. But then you continue to press deeper into your YouTube and podcast channel as an educational piece for what's happening in Cambodia, culture in Cambodia, all these types of things where you're educating people all around the globe about life in Cambodia, missions in Cambodia. And that's really cool too, because now we have, as you continue to update your YouTube channel and your podcast, people get to see what's happening currently in Cambodia and what the needs are in this moment, in the time and day and age in which we live. So I love that. That's just so cool.
Well, and one of the things I'll just toss out there about the podcast too is that when I first came over, a lot of people warned me about like coming over with my own plans. So that was what it was such a blessing. I think even OMF Cambodia has that policy of like, hey, don't get involved in too much ministry stuff for the first 2 years. Just do language and culture study. Just learn. But part of that learning process, so I was doing that while I was teaching, right? But then part of that was also, how do I learn how to be a missionary? And like, how do I learn from these people that have 20 plus years of experience, right? That's how I got connected with Nathan and a lot of other people doing amazing things over there. And they're very humble. They wouldn't boast about this stuff on social media. And so I feel like I got this like snapshot into like, if wisdom is more valuable than gold, I feel like I have access to incredible resources of wisdom over there in Cambodia. I mean, a lot of them who've been over there 20 years, they see some of the same cycles happen. Like they've been alive and over there for enough of the same stuff to cycle through. So things that like maybe me as a new missionary thinks like, oh, this is a great new idea that we're going to reach so many more people with that. Some of that can be true, but there can be a lot of false things in that or a lot of mistakes that you only learn from seeing them done. So that I was trying to figure out, how do I help share this? And I was trying to figure out, do I write a book or something? It's like people aren't as into that. I mean, it'd be cool to compile that, but that's what I think the purpose of why I've transitioned to the podcast is, because it's not my wisdom, it's other people's wisdom, and especially the people who've gone before. So I can kind of just make this treasure chest. My goal is around 100 episodes, but just a treasure trove of like, wow, save me from that mistake. Wow, save me from that mistake, because that's how I felt when I was talking to them.
Yeah. Well, it's cool because I remember being on this end of your experience as your name would come up because of the unique way in which you entered into OMF. And we were talking about the flexibility of this and what can we do? What can we not do? And then Brian Lee, who's the director of advocacy, brings this up. Hey, here's Travis, and here's an idea. We're thinking about bringing him onto the team. And would he be located in Cambodia and he's going to run the podcast? It was just cool to be able to be like, yeah, that would be so cool to have somebody on the U.S. team based overseas doing these things, these educational pieces, these live feeds, having a person to send somebody to that's actually on the field and can get us the most recent information of what's happening on the field and continue to educate us as things evolve and change over there. So I'm grateful, even though it was a very unique way that you ended up joining the fellowship, that you are a part of this fellowship to this day. It's really cool.
Yeah, it's been such a blessing. I mean, I loved getting to actually meet everyone, because that was like the best. Because now that I know everyone, it's just so much easier to connect and stuff like that. And maybe when I am back in Cambodia, I have to find some way of, I don't know, it ends up staying up till midnight or something like that to make our afternoon meetings. But I think I did it once, but it's just so great, with the fellowship there. And I think, man, I was so surprised how many people we had in OMF USA. I didn't even know it was that big. And there's amazing stories in there.
Yeah, God's been good. We're so grateful. Travis, as you look back at your life, and we've kind of just just touched the sort of tip of the iceberg of how God's working in your life and been working in your life since your childhood. Is there any sort of last words, any sort of last wisdom that you would like to give to our listening audience as we wrap things up and come to the end of our time with you?
Thanks so much for that question. And thinking about like Bible verses that have really changed my life. So I really like Psalm 34, 8-10. Oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. Blessed is the man who takes refuge in him. Oh, fear the Lord, you his saints, for those who fear him have no lack. The young lions suffer want and hunger, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. But I even paraphrase that last part of like, even extremely wealthy people, movie stars and YouTubers suffer want and hunger, but those who seek the Lord lack no good thing. So it's just like, with all that stuff, like, I know, like, it was tempting to think about like, hey, just work for Google for a little bit and I'll have enough money to fund missions for a long time. But like, nothing beats obedience. And that's a place where I'm currently in as well, too, because you constantly need to refocus. But, you know, what does obedience look like in this moment? And how do I remain obedient to that? And then another scripture, that do not worry about anything, that Philippians 4, 6-7, do not worry about anything, but instead pray about everything. And when you pray, always give thanks. And God's peace, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. So I think that's just like so simple. It's like, don't worry. And my physics formula brain likes that. It's like, okay, don't worry. Instead, pray and give thanks. It's like 3 things. Like, it's so simple, like in that order. And then you get peace that transcends all understanding and guards your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. That's incredible. And so I think that worry, which is really just, you know, fear of something or repeating a scenario over and over, a hypothetical scenario in your head, that's how Satan robs us of enjoying God and enjoying the moment and stepping forward in the good things that he's called us to. So yeah, I just say those 2 scriptures have been really guiding for me.
Awesome, brother. Love it. Love hearing it. So blessed how God's used you, how blessed that God's brought you to be a part of this fellowship. You go overseas, you find your spouse, you're growing a family, and you're dedicating your lives to serving the Lord and reaching the unreached peoples in Cambodia and beyond, and educating the world about what the needs are over there and how people can get involved. Brother, thank you. Thank you for sharing with us.
Thanks a ton. Blessings.
To learn more about OMF, visit us at omf.org/US.